the polonium. That's this, the polonium. The chasuble is what it's called in the Latin tradition, the chasuble. So that's what I was saying about how it has the sides of chasuble. That's the Catholics, and the Anglicans, Episcopalians have the same thing. All right, so the priest takes it and blesses it. So we take it in our hand, we bless the cross on the back, and we say this prayer here. It's actually, I think, from the Psalms. Yeah, from Psalm 131. We say, your priests, Lord, will clothe themselves with righteousness, and your holy ones will rejoice with gladness, always now and ever and unto ages of ages. Amen. All right, everybody with me on the citation? The polonium is the symbol of divine righteousness. That is a symbol of Christ, whom God made our wisdom, our righteousness, and our sanctification. Priests, clothe yourselves in righteousness, says St. Gregory the theologian, in the great and spotless garment which is Christ, our adornment. So, we a lot of times in the church, we talk about putting on Christ, clothing yourself with Christ, like in the hymn and baptism. All who have been baptized into Christ have put on Christ, have clothed themselves with Christ. Before the Word became incarnate, righteousness was not to be found upon earth. When Christ became man, righteousness descended from heaven and made its first appearance among men in true and perfect form. We who were formerly under indictment became friends of God and righteous through his death. When we participate in the sacred mysteries, sacraments, Christ causes his own righteousness and life to rise in our souls. The righteousness of God is his love for mankind. It is this that made us his friends through the death of Christ. And for that reason, the polonium, which symbolizes divine righteousness, also signifies the passion of Christ our King. And the priest imitates him as he puts it on. That is to say, he imitates Christ, who through his passion and death on the cross accomplished true righteousness. That is why the priest says, as he puts it on, your priests, Lord, will clothe themselves with righteousness, and your holy ones will rejoice with gladness. For indeed, the righteousness that came through the cross has brought us joy. The priests of the Lord clothe themselves in righteousness in Christ and are filled to overflowing with divine rejoicing. All right, now it's Deacon Ticon's time to shine here. So while the priest is saying these vesting prayers and vesting himself, at the same time the deacon is vesting himself. But in the book it comes up later. Oh, he's gonna go. All right, yeah. So,
can I ask a question though?
Yeah.
Because with all the prayers that you say for each piece of your vestment, when you take it all off, is there certain things that you say then as well?
No. Yeah. You would think that's a good question, but it's not. So this is the stichario. So this is the garment that goes underneath. So the important thing to remember is that originally in the very early church, of course, you had mainly adults who were being baptized, and they would be baptized with a white robe that would look exactly like this, right? So it had sleeves like this. It went all the way to the ground. It would be a white robe, and the white would symbolize the new purity in baptism, which is why the tradition is when we baptize children now, they put on a new set of clothing because they're putting it on Christ. They're putting on a new man, a new person. That's the symbolism of this clothing. And the tradition is that the clothing should be primarily white, right? Again, to symbolize it's harkening back to the original baptismal robes that were white. And that's why when we baptize adults, even still today, they have a white robe with maybe a cross on the back. So what happened was actually in the early church, the people would come, it's possible, we're not 100% sure, but when they could, the people would actually wear their baptismal robes to church, right? So when they gathered together in these house churches or in the catacombs, if possible, they were wearing their baptismal robes. But in any case, the priests, the clergy were doing that, right? So when they came to serve, they would put on their baptismal robe. that's how this Staccato developed. Was originally, it was the baptismal robe. So the priests, the Father Micah showed you last time, I'm guessing, wear the Staccato, and it's a thinner material, and it's mainly white. That's the first piece that we put on. The deacon puts on the same garment, again from this baptismal robe tradition, but it's typically thicker because it's the only piece that he doesn't put on another piece on top of it.
Right. So yeah, the priest's colonium became fancy with pretty fabrics. And so that's his outside garment. And so this is the deacon's outside garment. So it became prettier with fancier fabrics.
And there's really,
Yeah.
there's not much limitation on what you can put on. So a lot of times, these brocades, which is what this thick fabric is called, is sometimes they'll even use like from in the old days, they would use like from furniture, upholstery. And they would take, if it had a nice fancy pattern, they would take that and they would make it, because they didn't have anything else. They couldn't make special garments just for priests. So I think I have a set actually that looks like it's from, upholstery. So anyway, there's not really much limitation, and some people argue that when Orthodoxy goes to different lands, it should try to incorporate local elements, right? So in Central America, for example, I've seen vestments there. Maybe you guys could speak about that a little bit more, because you've been in many places on mission. And what have you seen?
So there's actually a group in Guatemala. It's one of the things that there's a large group of former Catholics who became Orthodox. I've heard numbers anywhere between like 40,000 and 300,000 or something like that. So it's a really large number of indigenous Guatemalans who came in, a charismatic leader who became disillusioned with the Catholic Church and brought them under the Orthodox Church. So they're becoming Orthodox still, even though this happened about 10 years ago. One of the things that they're doing to raise money is make investments. And so they have inexpensive labor, that they're getting, inexpensive fabrics. They do with traditional brocades and things of that nature. But they also got a lot of interest from, like, I asked about it at one point. I was interested in getting a set. I didn't ever fall through on it, but anyway, of using like indigenous Guatemalan fabrics, and they're really beautiful. These striped, with different colors of thread. Yeah, colorful woven fabrics. Yeah, and they're just really pretty. So, Father, what was the priest down there?
John Jacobs.
Yeah, I saw a picture of him. They were kind of purple. It was and the trahelion he had, it had all these stripes and patterns, but kind of in a purplish thing.
Speaking of color, does this book address color? Because I know you guys always have colors of the season, and the priest and the deacon color coordinate.
That's a good question. I don't think the book does talk about that. So a lot of people ask how we choose the colors that we wear. And basically, we just choose whatever we feel like wearing. There's in the Russian tradition and in the Catholic tradition and the Episcopalian Anglican tradition, there are more set rules for which colors you wear during which seasons of the year. In the Orthodox Church and the Greek tradition anyway, there's really only two categories. There's light and dark. Those are the two. There's nothing else, no other category. Whereas the Russians will have blue, green, red, white, gold. So dark means black or purple, and that's what we wear during Lent. So during the pre-sanctified liturgies, for example, we wear that color. And that's really the only time of year that we wear a dark color. The rest of the year, it's a light color. So even this is considered a light color because it's not black or purple. So basically, the guidelines, the kind of rules of thumb are that blue is for the Mother of God. So a lot of times, actually, just today we were talking about, Father Mike and I were talking about it, that Monday is the feast of the entrance into the temple of the Mother of God. So we said, okay, on Sunday we're going to wear blue because it's right next to the feast. It's the fourth feast of that feast of the Mother of God. And then today, for example, in the liturgy for St. Matthew, we said, okay, let's do red because he was martyred, like all the apostles, all the 12, except for John, he was martyred. So we wore red. Red is for any of the martyrs. White and gold is for the resurrection. So you can So especially on Sundays, but really any liturgy, full liturgy, not pre-sanctified. But any full liturgy is resurrectional, so you can always wear white and gold. Green is Pentecost, for example. You think of any others? That's it. I think that's it, but it's no hard and fast. Those are kind of guidelines for us, for the Greek tradition.
But the priest and the deacon always match, correct?
Yeah, we try to, yeah.
Yeah, you know, that's what-
Because y'all do the altar.
Yeah.
Cover your footsteps.
Was yours reversible?
no, this
It
just the
does
next
that.
time, it does, it's this is really fabric, I think. But yeah,
He stored the
not
inside
quite.
out to protect the fabric.
Yeah, so there's lots of smoke in the altar,
Uh-huh.
so I always hold them inside out and store them to try to keep the incense and smoke from damaging the outside of the fabric, so. But yeah, the pattern's not quite as nice, and you can see the stitching movement and everything.
Wow.
I do, you can almost pull it for this.
Ideally, we would always match. So we have one set that almost all of us have. There was that the metropolis said, "Thou shalt have this set." That's the only reason why we almost all of us have that one. But otherwise, each priest kind of picks what he likes. But ideally, you know, especially for a cathedral like us, I would like over the years for us to get, you know, at least a couple matching sets with different colors, but that's one of my long-term dreams. George?
You know, I want to digress just for a second. Like, what you were talking about with the Guatemalans, what, 300,000 maybe? Did that happen all over South America?
I think it was, that particular was just Guatemala, and they were all indigenous, like Mayans.
Well, I'm surprised that it didn't happen as, you know, the way the Catholics were through the whole South America. It's amazing that it didn't happen more.
It was one particular group, and it wasn't a straight line from Catholicism to Orthodoxy. They went through an evangelical period as well. And so, yeah, there was a particular Father Andre, I believe. But he took his flock from Catholicism into Orthodoxy
But yeah,
over the course of several years.
it's an evangelical challenge because they didn't even really speak Spanish that well. And they're indigenous, they spoke, you know, they're indigenous languages, so, yeah. You know, even lots of people speak Spanish, you go down there, no, it's like, you know, you can't even really.
That's interesting. I think. Well,
Yeah,
that's really, yeah, right, an unusual story.
Addressing the priest, maybe this is coming down the road. How about addressing the altar table? There's prayers or what, the altar table seems to be prepared when y'all are already coming, they're coming.
Yeah, we do it in between services whenever we're.
But are there prayers?
There aren't particular prayers for the altar. I mean, just the only kind of rules that apply are in general. If you should be ordained to touch the altar. So in other words, at least a deacon, a priest, or a bishop to touch the altar in any way, or to put anything on the altar, or take anything off the altar, you should be ordained. So then usually it's the priest, deacon who would change the altar covers. And then there also the color is just kind of by these same guidelines.
Follow.
Yeah,
Then-
but it's also that I explain to people that the biggest guideline is beauty.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
that's the most important thing. We want the church to be beautiful.
And even the idea of colors, like, I can't remember if it's the Catholics or the Episcopalian Church, but they actually like go, when we say that they have specific color guidelines, it's like a specific color.
Yeah.
Like it's like blue 324 or whatever the digit is, that's the color you're supposed to wear. And so they've even taken it to that extreme, but you know, that capability is extremely modern.
Yeah.
You know, the ability to dye a lot of fabric, a specific color, and to do that in mass is very recent. So, you know, like Father said, we're still very much kind of inheriting a more traditional approach towards fabrics, which is just that they were either dark or light. And you might have blue available, but it might be 10 different shades of blue or you know, or whatever. Or some of the awards that priests got, and they may have been, we talked about last time, but that may have actually been an award. Today, the priest is given the ability to wear that item and they go and buy them themselves. But we can imagine that probably in antiquity, that was actually, you were given a shield or a, you know, diamond that was an award and you wore that one.
That one, yeah.
And so your vestments probably didn't even necessarily match the same color, so. You know,
Instead of buy the vestments.
Yeah.
Are there special places, the monasteries or where it
Some-
makes the vestments?
Some monasteries make it. Here in the US, there's really not a whole lot. There's one lady out in Oregon who makes vestments, and other than that, there's some companies that import them from the traditionally Orthodox countries. For me, when I go to Greece, I shop for them.
there's a group of in Chicago that makes it.
And I grew up in
But,
Chicago.
yeah,
But you pay, if they make them here, you pay more because the labor in America is much more expensive. If you buy them in Greece, Eastern Europe, Bulgaria, Romania, you can find some really good deals.
and the quality oftentimes, I mean, except for like Krista, I think she still does good quality, but some of the quality of places in the US, they just don't have as much business.
So to make it, do they have to have a special designated man or woman?
No, anybody can make it. I mean, it was one of the traditional crafts of women's monasteries. And there's one in Amelia, the biggest women's monastery in Greece, northern Greece. And they actually, I've seen their workshop, it's amazing. They actually make their own thread from their own wool, like from their own. And then they use it fashion to make the fabrics. And they make these incredible like floral patterns but one set of vestments is very expensive. So for a priest, I would say
But you have a lot of.
you can't, for the whole thing, I would say the average is 1,200. something like that.
That's all.
You can get a really cheap set probably nowadays for 700, and then it'll go up to, I mean, like what we're talking about in Ardelia, 5,000.
Wow.
But I'd say, a pretty decent one, 1,200 to 1,500 or something like that.
The brocades like this are probably less expensive, and then they have even more plain ones that are just kind of plain fabrics with just a little detail around the edges of the building.
Father could say, because he's been there, but when we were in Athens, there's a part of Athens where it's nothing but church goods. There are fabric stores that sell nothing but vestment fabrics of every color. They're spectacular. I've heard Thessaloniki even better.
Yeah, so this one's from Thessaloniki, and this one actually, it's embroidered. So they use, now they have more technology, but they actually have a machine, they design their own patterns, and they usually get the pattern from some church decoration from an old church, or they kind of pick up a design. And they program it into this embroidery machine, and they put through the fabric, and boom, comes out. All right. So as the deacon vests himself, he says the same word as the priest when putting on the sticharion and the cups. So these are the cups here. They wrap around like this, around the wrist. So he says the same prayers that we already talked about, and then he takes the orarion, kisses it, and places it over his left shoulder, saying, "Holy, holy, holy, Lord of Sabaoth, heaven and earth are full of your glory."
Just wanted to show one example of what, so this is actually all hand done.
Yeah,
Believe it or not.
I got this. No, this one's actually
But this,
from Australia.
Yeah.
It's a company in Australia that does a lot of business, and they do. Yeah, this is embroidered. So the set that's on the altar in the chapel is from this place in Australia.
yeah, this one's really,
So what is that piece in your hand?
this covers the
So
gospel.
yeah, it covers the gospel and all.
That's all hand done, so.
That means when you leave the altar.
Which
you
this
go
there.
to-
Yeah.
That's what we use here.
Why do we cover that? Probably there's probably a practical reason, that you want to keep it clean. So you don't want anything that you can just take it off and shake off the dust. There could be also a symbolism that, that like when Moses was on Mount Sinai, and came down with the law, he had to veil his face because it was so radiant, right? So there could be some symbolism there that this is the new law. It has to be veiled. Yeah.
Don't they cover priest's face in a casket with that?
Yes, that's a good point. Yeah, so when a priest dies, they cover his face before they shut it up. They cover his face with a gospel.
And so their vestments are like super.
I said, but when the deacon comes back, he'll model his orarion. All right, the deacon, minister of the mysteries of Jesus Christ. The clerical order of the diaconate has its beginnings in apostolic times. So you read the beginning of Acts chapter 6, you'll see the institution there. And the deacon's task is to be of service during the celebration of the mysteries. Again, that means sacraments. Saint Ignatius the God-bearer, who Saint Ignatius, they say was, tradition says, was one of the children that sat on Jesus's lap. So he died maybe around 110, something like that, in a very old age. Saint Ignatius the God-bearer calls the deacons servants of the church and ministers, diaconia, that's what deacon means, is minister, serve, of the mysteries of Jesus Christ. And he admonishes the faithful, let everyone, that Saint Ignatius does, let everyone respect the deacons as they would Jesus Christ. All right, so now Deacon Tito is showing us how he would put it on.
Well, that's not how.
It's a little hard to put it on because it needs a kind of there's a button that hooks on to keep it from slipping off. And on this, he doesn't have that button.
It's a crazy little thing, but a lot of people tell me I wear it backwards, but this is the way Metropolitan likes, just put it on me, and this is the way he says for us to do it. So even though it's not right, it's a lot easier this way. And it goes much faster, so that's just how much he cares for us. I think that he tells us to do it the easier way, and it means that you guys don't have to stand around waiting for me to untie my investments too. So I think it's just how much he loves us, you know.
So in the Russian tradition, they wear it just straight over the
So
shoulder.
yeah, a deacon in the Russian tradition, the Aurorian, different levels is like an award. There's not really any awards in the Greek tradition for a deacon. And in the Russian tradition, they start out with what they call a single Aurorian, which just goes from the floor over the shoulder and back down to the back. So this part
Doesn't cross.
It doesn't have this extra piece. So this is what's called a double Aurorian, which is what we start out with in the Greek tradition. In the Russian tradition, this would be an award at a certain so many years of service. It's very militaristic, essentially, the way they do awards. So many years of service, you get such and such a thing. That's just very straightforward. In the Greeks, it's kind of like,
It's more honorary.
yeah. The bishop just decides he wants to do it, and he does it. But like I said, for the priest, for the deacons, there's not really. And then, and the Russians also have a archdeacon Aurorian, which looks kind of like this, but this part is actually cut open, and it like.
Yes.
With the
there's a-
button this button right here, where it like comes to a point. It's like tailored to this.
I think Father Deacon Rivers has that.
That's right. Yeah, he's an archdeacon. So he's got, and they're these big velvet, you know, with holy, holy, holy written on them, a lot of time in Cyrillic. So.
It's like the fringe over here. So
That's a good question.
Mhm.
There's only one priest that does the liturgy, basically, that represents Jesus Christ
Right,
during the liturgy.
Yeah.
Okay? And we're blessed to have a deacon. Okay?
Yeah.
But, and please don't take this wrong, okay, I don't know. But to me, the hierarchy would be that you're the one that represents Jesus, because like when there's 2 or 3 other priests, they're not doing anything.
They're assisting, yeah. What do we need a deacon for?
No,
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 so-
no, no.
So there's 2 traditions that developed in the early church about the
Okay.
understanding of the deacon.
Okay.
Saint Ignatius put forward this concept that the deacon was like Christ.
Oh, I see.
Because
Yeah, yeah,
he comes out of the altar to the people. So
yeah.
just like Christ came from heaven,
Comes-
he came to earth, the deacon does this during the service. He's constantly coming from heaven down to the people in and out. That imagery did not end up ultimately becoming the most popular interpretation and the one that persisted. The one that persisted is the idea of the deacon as like an angel.
Yeah,
So the angel's coming to minister, again, similar concept, but yeah, so that's, and even when I wear my Aurorian the other way, people will, when it's crossed in the front, they say that the crossing in the back is kind of like an angel's wings or something. It's the same.
Yeah,
yeah,
I just wondered.
yeah,
Yeah.
So, yeah, there's a lot of times you're gonna see as we go through the book, there's not always just one set of symbolism. You know, there's multiple layers of symbolism that go on, and sometimes they overlap, sometimes you can, if you try to construct them logically, maybe they could seem to contradict. But it's just different ways of looking at the same thing. So, yeah.
So I ask about the fringe, it would be similar to the fringe on priests, perpetrating and representing the people.
Yeah,
The priest is responsible for the people, you're technically not, or are you?
But you're praying for them still, right? You know, that's one of the things that I do in the service, and say, let's pray to the Lord. We're always, praying together. So, yeah, it's
And-
built.
it says he admonishes the faithful, so part of the deacon's job practically was to keep things in order, right? So he would, I mean.
Stand up, come in. go
Yeah,
in.
and America, I would say in the US, we're generally very respectful, just as a culture, but. If you go to the old country, you go to the Middle East, it's not exactly the same. So sometimes the deacon needs to bark orders at people, yeah, stop doing that, be quiet.
Pay attention.
Pay attention, keep order,
You distinctly talked about Greek and Russian.
Yeah.
What about Serbian Orthodox? Do they have their own way or other?
Serbian, I would say the two big ones are the Greek tradition and the Russian tradition. Serbian tends to be somewhere in the middle. In some areas, most areas, I would say they follow the Russians. But some areas they follow the Greeks. But mostly you can usually assume that they're going to follow the Russian Slavic tradition. But there's been a move recently in Serbia to kind of reclaim some of the older Greek traditions.
Yeah, Byzantine might be a better word.
Byzantine, yeah,
Okay.
Byzantine. So in the Middle East too, the Middle East tends to follow the Greek/Byzantine tradition.
Romania, somewhere between. They wear,
Romania is somewhere in between also, yeah.
their priests wear vestments like this, but they do some things that are more Slavic tradition.
Yeah, the Russian priest, you'll see the Felonion has a high back. Have you ever seen those?
Yes.
So that's a Russian thing. And it really was a practical matter because what it wasn't, they were very expensive to manufacture these vestments. And so sometimes they had to share, priests would have to share vestments. Maybe the church would have one set of vestments that whoever was serving would wear. And so when you have, these are more tailored, but when you have the high back, you can just put it on and slide it on. And if you're bigger, it'll stop here, and if you're smaller, it'll go down. So it's kind of a one size fits all. In fact, it was really a practical reason only. All right. So the diaconal dress consists of the stiharion, the big piece that he showed you, the cuffs, these, and the orarium. The last is the vestment peculiar to the deacon. It is first mentioned by the Council of Laodicea in the 4th century. The word orarium is derived from the Latin os, genitive oris, meaning mouth. So orarium means a cloth for wiping the mouth. Whereas the deacon gave the faithful to drink from the holy cup, those who came to drink from the holy cup would immediately wipe their mouths when they arrived. So now we have the makra, we call it, the red cloth. But at that time, they didn't necessarily have that, so they would use the deacon's orarium. I remember one time, I was serving at this church in Volos. I was still a deacon. And it was during Holy Week, and it was just packed. And there was a section of Volos that actually had a large gypsy population, Roma population. And they're Orthodox many times in Greece. But I remember they were coming in, and I think it was Holy Thursday night. They were coming in and they were venerating something. I think it was holy. They were venerating the cross, and then they were venerating the icons. And because I guess it was the Epitafion was in the middle, I was standing off to the side doing the petitions and holding the orarion like this. And so they would come here, they would venerate the icons, and then they would come and they would kiss the orarion that I was holding up, just because it was something to kiss, right? So you could see how people would, in fact, it's practical. A lot of times the church has symbolism, but also a lot of times it's a practical reach, right?
Yeah. I don't know if we even showed you guys these or not, but we keep talking about cups, but they work. They just had this very old fashioned. All has a set as zipper.
Oh.
So very,
Modern innovation.
modern innovations has not caught on, And then I've seen some that have Velcro, but don't wear one of those around the bishop. But most probably still use this kind of very old fashioned approach, but it just, if you have poofy sleeves, it
Yeah.
keeps them from from dangling into things. with-
And it symbolizes that now his hands are kind of marked off. They're for the service of God now. So his hands are no longer kind of his hands, they're Christ's hands reaching out. All right. The Orarion also signifies the spiritual quality of the angels. For the ministry of the deacon imitates the liturgical ministry of the angels, which we were just talking about. That is why the deacon recites the thrice holy angelic hymn as he puts on the Orarion. Holy, holy, holy Lord of Sabaoth. So they say that this is from Isaiah. Isaiah in this vision sees the angels praising God continually, saying, holy, holy, holy Lord of Sabaoth. Indeed, the deacons with their linen Orarion, like delicate wings, symbolize the angelic powers which run hither and thither, as ministering spirits sent forth to serve. The priest carries out the high priestly work of the Lord, and the deacon reminds us that the clerical ministry should be adorned with our master's humility. It is in this sense that the Orarion reminds us of the humility of the Lord, who washed the feet of the disciples and wiped them dry. Remember that from the Gospel of John doesn't actually have a Last Supper. It has instead Jesus washing his disciples' feet. Then the priest and deacon both go and wash their hands, each saying, I will wash my hands in innocency, and I will encircle your altar, Lord, that I may hear the voice of your praise and tell of all your wondrous works. Lord, I love the beauty of your house and the place where your glory dwells. Destroy not my soul with the ungodly, nor my life with men of blood. In their hands are iniquities, their right hand is full with bribes. But I have walked in my innocence. Redeem me, O Lord, and have mercy on me. My foot has stood in uprightness. In the churches I will bless you, O Lord. That's from Psalm 25. So we recite that as we wash our hands to prepare. So that concludes all the vestments. So in practice, what happens? So we take the kero that we talked about in the first chapter. We take the kero and we're not wearing any vestments. Then we come in and we start to vest ourselves. The deacon brings his vestments, folded up like this, presents them to the priest, just like the altar boys do. The priest blesses his vestments, blesses him to get vested. He goes off and starts reading the prayers simultaneously while the priest reads his prayers and vests himself.
This takes what, 20 minutes?
The kero takes probably 7-8 minutes, and then to vest, I mean, once you do it for a few years.
Father Bob can give it in like 30 seconds. Unbelievable. I'm still like trying to put him out of the door. I turn and he's like, scratch tied on his.
Yeah, I would say 5 minutes.
Yes.
Yeah.
So when they instituted the diaconate in Acts, it was a practical thing serving widows. When did it become part of the liturgy too, or was it always?
That's a good question. So the Acts. All right, now we're gonna get into the biblical stuff.
So we don't need to do that, it's fine.
So in Acts, it does have the institution of the deacons, but probably in the first century, there wasn't the same distinctions that we have now. It was more fluid. So they had different titles. So in the first century, for sure, they had deacon, diaconi, presbytery, and episcopi, deacons, priests, and bishops. But the roles were more fluid. So it seems that probably in the first century, the deacons were actually more like priests at that time. And so in different places, different times, they had different names for the same basic roles of teaching and serving, consecrating the gifts and serving the Eucharist. But the titles kind of were fluid until maybe the second century, when you have this clear second, third century, you have this clearer hierarchy. So like 2 weeks ago, I think, maybe less, at St. Simeon's, their bishop came and ordained a deacon. So, and then someone asked me, well, I thought two actually, you can only ordain one deacon per liturgy, and you can only ordain one priest per liturgy. And so they did one on Saturday and then another liturgy on Sunday to ordain 2 deacons. And someone asked me, well, I thought that so-and-so was going to become a priest, and why did they ordain him a deacon? And well, to become a priest, you have to first become a deacon. So there's a hierarchy, right? So It is possible, interestingly, it's possible that in the early centuries, like second or third century, it's possible, we don't know, that someone could have been ordained directly to a bishop. But for many centuries now, first you have to become a deacon, then from a deacon you become a priest, and then from the order of priests, you can become a bishop if you're not married or widowed.
And deacon is the highest order that you can attain in a single service from a layman.
Yes.
Because the ordination of a deacon takes place later in the service than the ordination of the priesthood does. So you literally can't be made a deacon and then made a priest in the same service, because we've already passed that part where you would have been made a priest.
So the priest is ordained right before the consecration of the gifts. And the symbolism is, okay, you're made a priest now so that you can help us consecrate the gifts. The deacon is always ordained immediately after the consecration of the gifts, but before the distribution of communion, because that's his job. He doesn't consecrate the gifts, he distributes the communion. So there's a reason for everything.
If a church had, like, if this church were able to hire him full time,
Yeah.
based on Act 6, would he handle the more menial ministerial responsibilities you have? To free you up like Acts or not?
If, well, like, let's say in Greece or Russia where they have, paid deacons. In practice in modern times, the deacon is primarily liturgical. So in those churches, like even in our Greek archdiocese, the archbishop has an archdeacon that travels with him, and his responsibility is almost entirely liturgical. In Russia,
Secretarial almost too,
yeah, that's true. His assistant.
He's their driver,
Yeah. Yeah, what you're thinking of is in the Bible about the kind of distribution of alms and helping the poor. Unfortunately, that's kind of faded away. The role of the diaconate in general kind of suffered a decline, maybe we would say, over the last couple centuries during the period of Turkish occupation in Greece. Because, what they explained to me in Greece was the bishop told me, he said, look, I have X amount of slots that I can afford, right? To so many positions for clergy. And the cost, the salary for a deacon and a priest is almost the same. So he said, why would I waste slots on a deacon who can't hear confession, he can't celebrate the Eucharist, so I'll have 3 or 4 to help me with liturgical things, but otherwise I need priests. And so especially when you had Byzantium, they had more of a full complement. They had deacons who did things, but under the Turkish period, the church was constricted. So they needed, whoever was going to serve the church, we need you to be a priest to, serve the liturgy and confess the people, etc. So
even relatively early in like the 4th or 5th century, at the time of the councils, the deacons became associated quite closely with the bishops. And they started to gain quite a bit of political authority, and it was the deacon would often become the bishop.
Yeah.
And that ministry was kind of separating. You had this deacon / bishop that was separating from the parish / priest. And at one of the councils, they kind of made a change to the diaconate and said, okay, we're going to make this hierarchy more clear. Like Father said, it is bishop, priest, deacon. Because the deacons, at the first council, some of the bishops said they're deacons instead of the bishops going and saying,
in Rome, for example, in the early centuries, the archdeacon in Rome had a lot of power because he controlled the money. He controlled all the charitable funds, so he had a lot of power.
So how are the bishops from the monasteries where they're always praying and
Theoretically, yes, the bishops, there's actually a canon, a rule of the church that says that the bishop should have the whole Psalter, all the Psalms memorized. Why? Because in the monasteries, that's the rule of prayer, is based on the Psalter, so that you actually read the whole Psalter every week. So in other words, the rule wasn't interested in the letter of the law. The rule was basically saying you need to be a real monk in order to be elected a bishop. But in practice, that doesn't always happen. In practice, there's monks generally don't want to become bishops. I mean, that's why they control monasteries, have their peace. not have complaints and all this stuff. So they're not really interested in becoming bishops. You have to like force them a lot of times. But then there's another track of celibate priests who live in the world, who they're kind of on the track. Maybe they have a relationship, technically they have a monastery, they may spend some time there, but then they're working at a parish. Like Bishop Sebastian, for example, would be a good example.
It's celibate.
He was a celibate archimandrite, which means basically a celibate priest who's eligible to become a bishop. But he was serving parish in the world, he was studying at a university. That's that track.
Technically a monk, but maybe,
Technically a monk. Yeah,
but not living in a monastery.
Yeah, sure.
all right. Let's see, I will wash my hands in innocency. One who lives with sin and does not repent is not able to glorify the Lord. He has a land that is foreign to God. Just as the Jews were unable to sing the Lord's song in a foreign land, so likewise one who is embroiled in the passions cannot sing in praise of God's wondrous works. So in the Orthodox Church, when we talk about the passions, it means the unruly desires that we have that can, when they're untamed, can take us over. And that's the purpose of the ascetical life or fasting now that we've entered into for nativity. For example, it's to tame these unruly desires and passions. If the law of Moses enjoined silence upon those who are captives and have become slaves of men in a foreign country, how much more should those be silent who are slaves of sin and live a life foreign to God? Indeed, sin is alienation from God. It's from St. John Chrysostom. The celibate who serves the Lord is aware that he has wounded God's love many times by the way he lives. And though he has received remission of sins through confession, he feels unworthy to sing in praise of the wondrous works of God. The celebrant's spiritual sensitivity is expressed in the anaphora prayer. The anaphora is the prayer like when we do the censing, when the priest comes out and does the censing, that's the time of the anaphora prayer. Who is able to tell of your mighty works, or to make known all your praises, or to recount your wonderful works at all times? We must approach the holy altar with purified minds. This purity is symbolized by the washing of the hands. Having our conscience clear and a pure mind and heart, which are the hands of our soul, let us approach the holy table with fear and with sobriety. Whatever work we do with our hands. So because the hands are a symbol of every action, by washing them, we suggest that all our actions are pure and blameless. Referring to the practice among Christians of his time of washing their hands when they came into church, St. John Chrysostom asks, do we wash our hands when we come into church, but not our heart? Is it the hands that speak? It is the soul that utters the words of prayer, and that is what God is looking at. To pray with an impure heart is the greatest of evils. Yeah, at that time, all the Christians were washing their hands. I mean, you see this in the Muslim tradition. They do ablutions before they enter into the mosque. But what's remained is for the priest. And in our church, on the outside of our church, above the door, the Greek that's above it. Does anyone know what it says? So it's a palindrome. So it was written by my saint, St. Gregory the theologian. So it's exactly the same forwards and backwards. And what it says, what it means is, wash not my face only, but also my sins. Wash not my face only, but also my sins. So this practice of washing the hands, washing the face, washing the fingers. The work of, let's see. Oh yeah, those who come to the all-holy celebration of the service should have purged their souls of every last fantasy, so as to approach with a soul that is as pure as the sacred service itself, insofar as that is possible. Thus they will be illumined ever more brightly by the divine epiphanies, the Eucharistic mystery. Epiphany means revelation. The work of cleansing our soul is performed by Christ if we desire it, just as he did at the Last Supper when he girded himself with a towel and washed the feet of the disciples. On that occasion, he made it clear to the Apostle Peter, who out of pious deference for Christ did not accept to be washed by him. If I do not wash you, you have no part in me. At the Eucharistic supper, there is a place with Christ only for those who have accepted with all that the Master should perform within them the washing of mind and heart. If anyone is not washed and cleansed by the grace of Christ from the pollution of sin and wrongdoings, he will have no share in the life which Christ offers, and will never taste of the kingdom of heaven. For those who have not been purified are not allowed to enter the heavenly dwelling places, but only those with a pure conscience and love for Christ. To each Christian who approaches to partake in the divine liturgy and of Holy Communion, the Lord says, "If I do not wash you, you have no part in me." Which is to say, if you do not first come to me with the repentance of the prodigal son, so that I can receive you back into my house, you cannot participate at the table of the royal wedding, the divine liturgy. We have therefore to come to the mystery of the washing of the soul, that is the sacrament of confession. In this way, pure in soul and body, we can gather around the holy altar to hear the angelic hymns of praise and add to them our own thanksgiving. We can recount the works of God's love. Acknowledging the debt we owe for God's ineffable benefactions, we offer him the divine Eucharist and receive communion, giving thanks because he has delivered the human race from error and brought us back to himself when we had strayed far from him. Giving thanks because when we were without hope and were in the world without God, he made us his brethren and heirs. With souls full of gratitude, we recount the works of God's love and wisdom, which have performed great and wondrous things. Through death came life, and through sin, justice. Through the curse came blessing, and through dishonor, glory. Giving thanks for all these things, we approach the throne of grace. All right, so now we're going to go on to chapter 3, the service of the preparation of the Eucharistic gift. So this is called the proscomidi, service, and it takes place at the prophestis. So this is when you're looking at the iconostasis from where you guys sit. It's over on the left, so in the left corner, let's say. So the altar's here and the prothesis is here. It could be like here or it could be off to the side, depending on the shape of the church. So you can see it. I mean, when you're passing in front of the beautiful gates, the central doors, you can see it in the back, can't you?
It would be nice if y'all
go
could
and
do
check
a
on
video
your phone.
back there
Yeah,
and share it with us.
yeah.
Go on the chat.
Where are the
Oh, yeah.
chapel?
Okay, when we leave, we'll show you, because you can see it pretty clearly here in the chapel. And you see that there's an icon there in the back. Usually the icon is one of two things. It's either the Christmas icon, the Nativity of Christ, and the symbolism he's going to discuss, because this whole service we're about to discuss is Christ being born in the church, and then we're going to take him to be sacrificed and resurrected in the divine liturgy. Or so it's either the Nativity of Christ, which it is in the cathedral, or it's the icon of extreme humility, which is Christ basically on the cross, which is the bridegroom icon we bring out during Holy Week, and that's the one that we have in the chapel here. So we
The
can,
chalice and that.
yeah, we'll bring out, that's showing it for next time.
Yeah,
And then for next time, I think we're gonna get to it. I'll bring a prospora, which is the bread that we use, and I'll show you how we cut it up in the service of the prospora day. All right, so I guess we're out of time for this week, but it's good. The point is not to just buy through the book. The point is to have a good discussion. You guys learn something, so. Glad you guys are here, and we'll show you in the chapel.